Hello, thank you for joining us, everybody. My name is Helen Brown. I am managing partner of Seeblue Marketing. We are a specialist ABM agency located in the UK. In particular, we specialise in one-to-few ABM. I am joined today by Rob Norham. So Rob is very well known in ABM and marketing circles. Rob has been an ABM consultant for the last 20 years, following a long career in B2B marketing. And he also runs his ABM Essentials training course and has been doing so for the last 6 years. And if all of that were not enough, Rob is also the ABM expert for the Propolis community, which is B2B marketing's expert community, guiding B2B marketers across the world to make sure they have the right knowledge to deliver exceptional marketing programs. So that's our introductions today. Rob, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Very nice to join you as well, Helen.
Brilliant. So today we want to have a chat about this topic and addressing the topic of bi-modal, as you have called it, ABM. So what do I mean by modal for the audience? This is thinking about the difference between the long and the shorter term objectives that you have with ABM. So we all know that most typically ABM is targeted at large, high value enterprise accounts. That means typically longer sales cycles, making delivery of instant in-year revenue very challenging. So most typically they're longer term programs. But we also work really closely with sales, and sales have quarterly targets. So this conversation is about how do we deliver for the long term and how do we deliver for the short term and manage to set expectations well in all of that. So Rob, would you describe bi-modal in the same way, or have you got a different take on it?
Well, I think that's a good starter for 10, Helen. I picked up the term originally. I was doing some workshops many years ago with some technology clients, surprisingly, and they started talking about bi-modal IT. And bi-modal IT essentially was a term coined originally apparently by Gartner in 2014. And what they were essentially talking about was most organizations look at IT from the perspective of keeping the lights on. You know, it's about technical support, it's about underpinning the business, it's about making sure everything works, it's about rollout of hardware and software, etc. But increasingly, as digital transformation became an important agenda point, over the last 5 to 10 years, companies have obviously seen IT or technology as a differentiator, a strategic differentiator for the business, and it's been much more about innovation and change. So in that context, bi-modal IT was essentially saying there's the business as usual form of IT, keeping the lights on, and then there's the innovation angle. So clearly those are twin tracks and quite often require different people, different skill sets, and different technologies. And I kind of picked up on that analogy from an ABM perspective, because as you said, Helen, most companies start off accepting that ABM is about a long-term strategic play to your most important accounts and prospects. But then most organizations also bump into this challenge, which is how do we support the sales organization with immediate quarterly short-term sales goals? So in that context, I think bi-modal says we need to have a strategic approach and we need to know which accounts are in market for that long-term play. But we also need to be flexible enough and smart enough to have an approach that will support the sales team with shorter term objectives.
And so do you find that most of the clients that you're working with, do they approach both at the same time? Does the strategic tend to come first and then the tactical comes in because sales have knocked on the door and said, actually, we really need something slightly different? What is the most common way of taking it to market that you see?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think it varies, again, enormously in the sense that some companies start off with this concept that we're going to run an ABM pilot, and perhaps they pick a couple of accounts or a couple of segments for a one-to-few program. And so it's very cautious, it's dipping your toe in the water, and business as usual marketing is going on alongside that. I've been increasingly talking about taking a full stack ABM approach. You might have seen that model that I published a while back. And that's really about putting ABM front and center of your entire marketing strategy and showing a joined up approach from, brand into acquisition, into growth, and then of course, ultimately one-to-one. So I think some companies start with that cautious pilot across a handful of accounts, and other companies dive straight in the deep end, buy a piece of technology, and immediately assume that they're going to be doing, what you might call, mass ABM, certainly intent-driven ABM to a large number of accounts.
Yeah.
And those are kind of polar opposites of the ABM spectrum. And I think most companies start either with the former or the latter. They rarely look at blended strategy. And that's the angle I've been taking for some years now, which is, I think, a blended approach where you don't have all your eggs in either basket makes most sense.
Yes, and I think, so you described to me before how, or rather the importance of, for either mode, it's building the reputation and the relationship, which gives you the ability to go after the revenue. And both long and short term require both of those. So I think when it comes to those of us who strategize and plan and deliver programs for clients, what are those different tactics that are relevant and useful for those different modes? Because both need you to have built a relationship, both need you to have a good reputation before anyone's going to talk to you about your solution, your service, and your price. So if you, I guess, getting more into the tactical space for the longer term approach. So let's say we're talking about our 12-month plus sales cycles, big strategic accounts, and we're looking at a go-to-market plan over 18 months or so. Have you seen any specific changes, interesting things happening, tactics being used in market that are particularly effective at the moment? For example, I'm intrigued as to how events are changing, people either wanting or not wanting to or willing to attend them. What have you seen change?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, I think in a lot of ways things haven't changed dramatically over the last several years from a one-to-one point of view, because I still think it's about aligning the sales and marketing teams internally. It's about in-depth knowledge of the account. It's about creating a strategy, value proposition, and messaging that's really going to resonate with that account. And it's about identifying all the right stakeholders that you want to reach, and then finding smart ways to do that. So from a comms point of view, I tend to talk about hero assets and building a series of those that you're going to have a certain cadence on, normally starting with something that's going to support the sales team, a really compelling presentation, but then probably building out a landing page and then creating content that will drive people to that, and then thinking of smart things to use, which could be video, infographics, white papers, manifestos, etc. And there's nothing wildly new in that context. From the point of view of moving from the hero assets into how do we socialize those, obviously email marketing is an obvious thing to think about. I think social selling clearly has definitely increased in terms of its influence and power. So involving a wider set of people, particularly the sales team, to get people into those hero assets and helping them with content is important. And then, of course, there's normally air cover across a wider set of accounts within, a set of contacts within the account. But in terms of your point about events, I mean, I think they're very important. I would just see them as typically being a call to action rather than necessarily the starter for 10. So if you think about early stage engagement, it's probably bringing people into educational webinars. If you think about bringing them through the sales funnel, or perhaps you're now looking at a one-to-few or one-to-one aspect, you might be bringing them into thought leadership roundtables, industry focused or topic focused. And then ultimately, of course, if you're in a one-to-one space, you want to be creating bespoke events potentially for a single account, and that might be executive dinner briefings or things where you can be more creative and obviously focused on a single account. So again, I think it's quite a tiered approach, and it rather depends where you're at in the journey and how many accounts you're targeting at any one time.
Yeah, indeed. Actually, something that you reminded me of that Seeblue often do right at the start of that journey, whether it's one-to-one or more typically in our one-to-few play, is focusing in early on the creative concept phase. So we like to use existing assets and information and content as much as possible, but it's tapping into the system 1 and system 2 thinking. System 1, for the audience that never heard of it, being the focus on the emotional response, the instant, first 3 seconds. How do you are you attracted or not when you see a visual piece of information? And then system 2 is the logic. So, okay, you might have attracted my attention on a screen, but how do I stay with you and how do I make sure I read that information? So it's actually something that we do really early on in the process. As soon as we've understood that value proposition and message, is think about how will we engage emotionally with that client? Because in this world, it's, you know, digitally busy, and yes, as you say, you get to events, but perhaps that's further down in the go-to-market process. So attracting somebody's attention up front is really, really important, and that's had really good success. An example of that would be a business that we've been working with, have been on a journey with their clients since almost the 1800s, and then continuing to shape that journey for the future. So it very much becomes a sort of elongated timeline from black and white into the color of today, and that's the kind of simple creative visual that can help to engage with those clients when you're looking at your strategic accounts who are really on a journey with you.
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard the system 1, system 2 before, but I kind of see how that would resonate. And I tend to think about when I'm thinking about messaging, for example, what's the big idea? What's the overarching value proposition that's really going to have cut through, that's going to get them to sit up and take notice, which I guess would be your system 1.
Yeah.
And then I normally think about supporting messaging pillars, which is where you actually solve specific problems. And that would probably be system 2, where you're saying, well, you've got this business driver or pain point. This is exactly what we can do to help you. These are the outcomes you could expect. And this is why we're the people to do it. You know, so in that sense, I think that's quite a nice analogy.
Yeah, lovely. So let's, because I think, I don't know about your experience and tell me if different, but planning for the longer term feels, it has a logic, it has a time frame, and it's allowed to evolve and develop over time, hand in hand with sales and the structure of the account, and when you're meeting, and different, I guess, moments in time during the procurement and purchasing process. One of the challenges that often gets kind of thrown over the fence to Seeblue to say, okay, what would you do in this situation, is the really gritty bit about, I've got a 9-month sales cycle, but I need in-year revenue. And actually, I need to get new clients into my business. So it's an acquisition play. Go. What's your ABM strategy? For me, that's actually one of the hardest things to respond on, because the very first part of that is expectation setting. Because if it's absolutely net new acquisition and you want in-year revenue in a 9-month sales cycle, that's going to be a real uphill struggle. But you need to come back with something productive and say, well, this is what we can do. So as you're engaging with the clients that you work with, Rob, what are some of the strategies, tactics, approaches that you take when someone gives you that, you know, this is the world on a stick, this is what I would love to have? How do you come back to, okay, so this is what we will do?
Well, I think fundamentally ABM should be embedded in the needs of the business. And I think it needs to be brought into, from a senior management, executive management level down. So then I think it's about, well, what's most important to us? And, if you're looking at winning 15 new name accounts during a 12-month period, and you would see 20, maybe 50% of your revenues coming from new name, new business, versus 50 to 80% coming from existing customers, then that starts to drive your strategy, which says we should be investing this amount of time, effort, and money in acquiring new customers, and we should be investing this amount of time, effort, and money in growing our existing customers. Then it comes down to, well, what's the relative role of marketing versus sales in those two plays? And I've had situations where marketing have been tasked exclusively with new name, new accounts, which obviously is the hardest place to play. And I've had other situations where it's a blended approach, and the sales team are looking for marketing's help even with growth accounts. So I think every organization is going to be different, but the most important thing is have a really clear strategy that's been bought into at a hopefully a board level, but certainly a very senior level. Make sure that is then socialized with both sales and marketing, and then start to think about your approach based around account selection, existing versus new, and then the approach you're going to take. And simplistically, and it is simplistically, then a one-to-many play is probably going to work best if you're looking to break into new name, new accounts at scale, and you're looking, dare I say it, for leads or marketing qualified leads that you can then bring into the sales cycle. That's obviously a sort of quasi demand gen, but I would like to think about it account-based demand gen, because the accounts are pre-selected. At the same time, and this is where we almost come back to the bi-modal piece, there are going to be strategic accounts that perhaps are existing customers you need to grow. And that's where perhaps having a couple, 2, 3, 4, one-to-one plays, in market at any one time would make sense. And you might even have, a couple of one-to-fews in play where you're looking at some key verticals where you're really strong. So I don't know if there's an answer to your question, because it's obviously pretty complex, but I think you need to kind of look at the building blocks. You need to work out what the company really needs, and how sales and marketing can be working most effectively on a combination of new name, new accounts and account growth. And then you kind of create an approach and a strategy that will reflect that.
Yeah, the combination is the key, isn't it? Because no single thing will answer all of somebody's ambitions and goals. And I think the thing you said right up front there about making sure you first understand what is your split between perhaps acquisition and existing, and assign the budget accordingly. Make sure you know what the average deal size is and the volume of accounts you're going after, so that you can build back into your ROI projections and therefore understand what you can and should be spending, as opposed to starting with, well, how much will it cost to do X, Y, Z? So all good marketeers will operate in that way. But I think it's just a useful reminder that in ABM, when you're starting to build layers of complexity into different ABM approaches, that keeping it simple sometimes helps. I think it's the best way forward, if you like.
I think so. And I think having those important conversations up front with leadership, is where marketing should be playing. Where they shouldn't be playing is a sort of knee-jerk reaction to sales saying, get me some leads. Because as we all know, marketing then run around like crazy, generating some leads. And then sales say, well, those aren't the kind of leads I wanted. So then you're almost into that Einstein thing of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Is the first kind of insanity. And we really need to be careful, I think, that we don't start the program with the best of intentions and then immediately find marketing or the agency on the back foot, running around trying to meet unrealistic goals and objectives. Yeah,
I absolutely agree. Rob, thank you so much. It's been brilliant talking to you. I know it's a whistle-stop tour of bi-modal ABM, making sure we keep the long and the short term going at the same time, but being particularly clear about what ambition, what objectives you're trying to achieve with both, and matching budget and investment and strategy and tactics to each of those very clearly. Any final comments from you?
Well, I guess I would just say it's important to have that strategic long-term view. And of course, that's about looking at your most important accounts and prospects. But I think it's also important that marketing are seen to be capable of being, responsive. So it's important to have an approach for that shorter term view. And I think then it's about setting expectations on what the likely return and results are, and making sure that there are no false promises. So from my perspective, the bi-modal ABM makes absolute sense, but it's definitely about setting expectations, managing those, and then obviously being as effective as you can, either with the strategic long-term play or generating early stage conversations that hopefully, business development reps or sales development reps can pick up and qualify quickly for sales to then, jump into.
Yes, and sometimes, or often forgotten actually, is taking what's been learned when you're doing that one-to-one deep strategic work, the learnings from each of those experiences, and pulling it straight back into your one-to-few or one-to-many cohorts. Because whilst that is a unique targeted play to an individual account, there'll be learnings in there that are absolutely relevant for other accounts. So will need to be adapted, but can be used to drive and build content to get you going faster on your acquisition, for example.
Yeah. No, I think your point earlier about reuse, repurpose, and any work that you've done, whether it's on a one-to-one and then scaling that into one-to-few, or whether it's on a one-to-few in an industry segment, saying, well, we've done some heavy lifting with these 10 accounts, but actually now we've got that value proposition and messaging, we could take that to another 100 relatively quickly through digital advertising or using some kind of platform play.
Fantastic. Rob, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Good speaking to you. See you again soon.